writing self-help for a long time, and I finally realized that the biggest obstacle to everyone's forward progress is anxiety. Anxiety has been skyrocketing around the world. So I started really studying it from the perspective of sociology, which is my field academically, and brain science. And I found out that we're sort of predisposed to getting stuck in anxiety, and our culture really pushes us to it. But the one thing we can do that where we can block anxiety from our brains is to start creating things. The creative part of the brain cannot be turned on while the anxiety is. So you can, when you get anxious, your creativity turns off. But you can turn anxiety off by making yourself do something creative. And you have to do this in a very compassionate and loving way. But it's sort of I felt like I'd found a silver bullet because I've had so much anxiety in my life. And when I tried this methodology, get kind, get curious, get creative, suddenly my anxiety dropped to zero. So that was my story about why I wrote Beyond Anxiety to help other people do that. Stephen, what made you excited to write about joy and to write this really wonderful, wonderful book for the rest of us?
Well, it's a circuitous story. I really didn't intend to write this book. I was working on something else. And in 2017, I had what I've called a pretty shitty year. It's a challenging one. My parents both died within a 3-month period. My husband and I separated in between. That wasn't exactly my choice. And then my sister was diagnosed later that year with ovarian cancer, which is not one of the good ones. And I found my usual skill set beginning to fail me. And so I just started doing some reading. I started reading about happiness, and happiness didn't seem to be what I was seeking. And it turned out that what I was looking for was joy. And I didn't really understand what joy was either. I kind of thought, like many, that it's sort of this big bang. It's what happens on July 4th, or it's what happens in the bedroom. It's sort of all hands on deck. And the more I read and the more I understood, joy has so many different manifestations.
Yeah.
And so when I began to say to myself, well, maybe you're not actually joyless, my friends did call me Eeyore sometimes, which kind and a little bit of a nudge. But there are joys that are quiet, that are introspective. We have anticipatory joy about what's going to happen in the future, and memories take us back to joys in the past. So it's much more, as almost going to say complex, but it's not complex. It's just fuller. And then through that, I began to sort of create a roadmap of how I was going to have more joy every day. It's not a direct roadmap. Some of the turns include getting lost, which means sort of going off the grid, and may not be for everybody, but there are about 40 different suggestions here. And I see that your book, like mine, has within each chapter, exercises to do, which I
Yeah.
found very useful. And, when you get to Martha's book, don't skip over them. It's really important to spend that time and do that homework to get the payoff from the program. And similarly, I would say the same about mine, but with less conviction, because I don't want to do that. But so that's how my book came to be. And the other part of it is sort of the Maria involvement, which we both have. And I know people are always interested about, well, how did you come to have Maria Shriver as your publisher? And
Right.
that's said to myself, how did I come to have Maria Shriver as my publisher? And the answer is I wrote a column. I'm a columnist for the Washington Post and a contributor to the New York Times. And I've been a journalist for most of my life. I realize I skipped my bio in all of this. But I did a column midway through the pandemic about, I think it was called How to Find Joy in Difficult Times. And it was an
Yeah.
early look at some of this. It got a lot of interest, but it apparently caught Maria's eye because she called my literary agent a couple of months later and said, would Stephen be interested in writing a book about joy and finding joy? And I wasn't sure that it was a book, and I wasn't sure I was the right person, but here I am now, and here we have a book. And so how about you? Because I know this is your second book with the Open Field and with
Yeah. Yeah. My story is a bit weirder and it's still very wonderful. I'm gonna start it back because Maria and I have been friends for like 2 decades now, almost a long time. And we were friends long before she was my publisher. And one time she was going through a really rough time, and I do this coaching stuff, right, to help people move forward in life. So we were hanging out together, and I said, "Look, I know things are really your life is upside down right now, so we're going to do a kind of cheesy thing. We're going to make a vision board. We're going to do it. We're going to get a piece of paper. We're going to cut out pictures from magazines. We're going to put it on the paper. Yes, it's a cheesy new age manifestation tool, but also if you look at it psychologically, it's a way to make you imagine a future so that you become a sort of guided missile. You start making choices that take you toward the things you've seen on that board. So, okay. So she looked through the magazines and she said she finally got a picture. I don't even know what the ad was for or what the article was about. It was just a picture of an open field with I think a horse and some birds. And she cut that out. She put it on the paper and she said, "That's it." And I was like, okay, very directed, not as much variety as most people use. And she said she just always in her heart remembered this poem from Rumi, a Persian poet. Out beyond judgments of right doing and wrongdoing, there is a field. I'll meet you there. She said, I just want to go out beyond judgments. Cool. All right. So that time went by. We did a lot of things, and I wrote some books. And then I wrote a book that was purchased by Penguin Books and under an imprint called Pam Dorman. And I was writing away. It was called The Way of Integrity. And I got a call and they said, we've created this new imprint and it's run by Maria Shriver and it's called The Open Field. And your book is going to come out from the open field. So I actually didn't know that this would happen when I was writing. It happened in the middle of the writing process. But when the book came, I looked at the spine. I was looking for a copy of my book so I could show it to people. Then I realized we're all on audio. On the spine of the book is the logo of the open field, which is a horse with a few birds. And there, okay, so Stephen's holding it up. It is a little model of what she put on that board that day. And both of us sat there and looked at that. And then 15, 16 years later, here comes this book in the mail with Maria Shriver, the publisher, me, the author, and the open field on the spine. It still gives me the chills. So it's very, yeah. I don't know how it's been for you, Stephen, but for me, it's been to be published by her as an experience of being loved and valued and knowing that my readers are loved and valued, and also the whole publishing staff.
Yeah, I mean, one of the questions we have is like, what's it like to be in the Open Field Collective? I kind of think of it much more as a family. And everyone from the Penguin Random House folks who are on this to the Sunday paper and Open Field people and to Maria, to Maria most of all. And I have found that her authenticity has been a real driver for me. And the second ingredient that I talk about in my book is about the importance of authenticity. And if we can't be our real selves, it's very difficult to know others and to have others know us. And I'll tell you a little story that I started to tell you before we began. But so last week I was having a pretty severe problem with anxiety. I'm used to anxiety and depression as kind of a chronic way, but it overtook me, and I decided that I needed to ask for a little bit of grace from the producer here, because we were supposed to tape this a couple of days ago. And I meant to write Madison, but I wrote all 10 people on that thread. 8 of whom I don't even know, but they included my editor, my literary agent, the publicist, we'd never talked. And I was like, oh my God, my big stupid thumbs. I was just like mortified sharing. I felt some of the stigma that goes along with acknowledging this. But then people wrote me on that list, people I didn't know. They checked in on me. They shared some of their personal stories. And I realized that was one of those moments of being vulnerable that led to that kind of connection. And I felt uplifted by this very small community. And then I wasn't like so appalled with, my thumb mistake.
And you told me you also So you got anxious. I'm curious about this because you did exactly what I found works for people who are struggling with anxiety. And it's worth kind of parsing it. So the first thing is love, kindness, and surrounding the anxious self with acceptance. Instead of saying, I'm going to bring down my anxiety, I'm going to fight my anxiety. What if I told you I'm going to bring you down? I'm going to fight you. It wouldn't make you feel happy. So the first step is to be surrounded by love for the one who is anxious. And you did that inside yourself and you did it around yourself with
Mhm.
this community. And then we were saying right before we went live, you went to your laptop
Yeah, I
and
did. I went outside, and it's kind of interesting. The ways that you write about countering anxiety are many of the same uh, ways that I talk about finding
I
joy.
noticed that. I
So
noticed that too.
I took a walk around a big lake where I am, and so I have a chapter about the joy of blue, which is really about the power that water has to heal us, as does the forest and open spaces. And and then and then I did go to my laptop, and what I have done for almost all of my adult life is when I feel that I'm short-circuiting inside, I come to my laptop. This is like a safe space for me, and
Hmm.
just start to write. And I'm able to tune out what's happening and and heal in a certain way. And I always come out, sort of better and more whole on the other side.
Right.
But so that kind of prompts me to ask you a little bit more about the anxiety you mentioned at the beginning and that you write about in the book. And then how did you come to this program?
Mm. Yeah, it's not such a program as a way of finding yourself, finding your way through your brain.
Mhm.
First of all, fear is a different thing. It's a healthy response to anything that's physically present. So we're not talking about fear. Anxiety is that gnawing, haunted feeling that keeps us awake at night, that kept you feeling like you didn't want to engage. You needed time by yourself. And it was, I mean, it's a horrible, horrible feeling. It's like being haunted. So I'd had that almost my whole life. I mean, from early childhood. And as I was
Tell that story about when you're 4 or 5.
Oh yeah, I remember just lying in bed looking at the ceiling the night before my birthday, and I was like, "Oh my gosh, I have been wasting my life. What am I doing? I haven't done enough." I was turning 4. And it just got worse from there. It was I my pediatrician had to periodically put me on Valium just to get me through things at school. It was I have a naturally anxious system. So somehow, using a lot of the methodologies, or at least comparable to the methodologies that Stephen writes about, I became obsessed with finding my way to joy. And it was finding my way to joy that healed me. And I did that before I started thinking about anxiety. So the fact that Stephen's book is coming out right now and then mine is in January, I love that. Use his processes. If you still have anxiety, you can try mine. Because once you know how joy feels, and you know that anxiety is not your natural state, you were not meant to feel this horrible way. But your brain, I talk about it in the book, there's some
Mhm.
brain science, it gets stuck in this little loop where it believes its own frightening stories. And that's all it is, a loop of frightening stories.